Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Flash Season 7 review series. And today I am going to be talking about episode 15, Enemy at the Gates, which I have just finished watching, and this episode was absolutely brilliant. I loved every minute of it and every second of it from start to finish. And it's really felt like a return to top form for the show. And in my opinion, this episode was one of the best of Season 7 so far. And what I loved about this episode the most was it was all about the Flash. No other side stories going on. This was all about the Flash doing his thing, trying to save the day, and just being the fastest man alive. And that's what we've been wanting to see for quite a while, and this is exactly what we got and more. And what more can you say? I mean, I know I've said for the past few editions of this review series that I kind of feel like the show has just been on a downward spiral, that they've not been producing some great stuff, and a lot of the episodes have been very up and down, and there's been some very weak ones. And I know, and we all know, that the show is so much more capable of delivering epic stuff because we've seen it in the past. We all have. But for me, this episode was a real step in the right direction, and as I mentioned already, a real return to top form for the show. And nothing bad I can say about this episode except top notch. So this episode saw the return of Godspeed, but there was a twist this time. Instead of one Godspeed or two Godspeeds, we saw an army of Godspeeds. And this reminded me of an old Flash comic. I think it involved the Reverse Flash or Professor Zoom, or one of the two villains, where he made copies of himself and was just beating the crap out of the Flash. That's what this episode reminded me of, and it was absolutely fantastic to see the Flash going at it with an army of Godspeeds, and they were just putting the beating to him. It was just absolutely epic. And I never realised this until now, but we are actually getting quite close to the season finale, and more importantly, we are getting very close to the 150th episode of The Flash, where we are going to be introduced to the debut of Impulse, aka Bart Allen, who is going to be making his debut in the Arrowverse very soon. So lots of great stuff to look forward to there, but that's going to be for another time. But this episode, as I mentioned already, was just brilliant. Very well written, lots of action, lots of great storytelling, and as I mentioned, it really felt like the old Flash that we all know and love. And we know from the beginning that the show is capable of delivering good stuff because we've seen it. And this one definitely was the shot in the arm the show needed, because apart from maybe the first 2 or 3 episodes and a couple in the middle, maybe about 4 or 5, Season 7 hasn't exactly been setting the world on fire for me. It's been very, very weak, but this episode, absolutely epic. So with that all said, let's get straight into it. Let's talk about episode 15, Enemy at the Gates. So we see Barry is at work in the crime lab when suddenly his daughter Nora shows up and tells him that everything's going to work out and that she loves him. Now this was obviously a dream, and this was the first time that we have seen or hinted at anything about Nora Allen since the end of season 5, when she was erased from time. So clearly this episode was setting up her eventual return, and it was good to see Nora Allen again. I thought, it was a nice callback to season 5, where she was a big part of that. And Jessica Parker Kennedy, looking good as always, and looking forward to seeing her come back in the 150th episode. So clearly this episode was building up to that, and it was good. And it turns out Barry was dreaming, but when he wakes up, he immediately calls Iris to tell her that he thinks that they could be pregnant. Now, over the course of the last few episodes, Barry and Iris have been trying for a child, and it looks like in this episode that could actually happen, that Iris could be expecting. So at home, we see a nervous and frantic Barry rush around to get some blood samples to Star Labs, but he runs into Cecile on the way out to the door, though he flounders his way through, not revealing anything. This was actually Barry Allen at his dorky and nerdy best, trying to cover up things and just stammering and goes, well, like what we saw in the earlier episodes of The Flash when we first met Barry Allen. So that was a nice callback to those moments. Meanwhile, at Star Labs, Frost is working on some art and Chester comes to tell that Mark is out front. Chester thinks that maybe he's turned over a new leaf, but Frost isn't so sure and decides she's going to watch Mark's every move. At Ralph's PI office, which is where Joe is working, Joe and Kramer work together to go over the information he's covered about the military attack. As they chat, Kramer reveals that Adam's call sign was Rasputin, and Joe tracks it to a boat nearby as Adam has named his boat the same thing. Joe reminds Kramer their mission needs to be about justice. In Central City, we see an army of Godspeeds begin to show up. Now, seeing an army of Godspeeds appearing gave me chills because Godspeed in this episode didn't speak at all, made some weird noise, but for the most part, he didn't speak. And to me, that's what makes a great villain. If you can keep the dialogue to a minimum, the better the story and the better for the episode. And that's exactly what happened here. And I'm really glad they went with that, not having Godspeed speak at all, because I think that's what makes him more evil and more mysterious. In the lab at Star, Caitlin works with Ultraviolet, but her situation is complicated. Caitlin thinks she can fix things, but Ultraviolet isn't unwilling to go through it. Kayla pleads with her to reconsider. At the bar, Mark is getting beaten up when Frost arrives and saves him. He's pretty badly wounded, and there isn't really anywhere that Frost can take him that Mark hasn't victimized. She ends up having to take him to Star Labs. Barry ends up having to take his samples to the crime lab for testing, since Caitlin is busy. Cecile shows up and figures out what he's doing, but before they can get a result on the test, the windows blow out of the lab, destroying the samples, and Barry, with his super speed, manages to save Cecile, and they narrowly escape. Now, seeing Barry saving someone with all the glass breaking at super speed brought back epic memories of the earlier episodes of the show. So, there was lots of callbacks to earlier episodes, I think. The team starts to sort things out at Star Labs and discovering there are multiple Godspeeds causing issues and causing trouble all around Central City. And not only that, they're disappearing as quickly as they're showing up. Barry heads out to try to deal with the situation, and Mark tries to get Frost to agree to let him help. She, of course, says no. Ultraviolet agrees to the surgery and Caitlin begins to operate. Barry goes to confront one of the Godspeeds at the power plant, and Chester is able to translate what he's saying, and it turns out it's a trap. A lot of other Godspeeds show up, prompting Barry to have Chester drop the protective shield around Star Labs. Barry makes it just in time, and the Godspeeds are locked out. The Godspeeds try to get through the force field around Star Labs. Barry and Chester try to come up with a plan since the force field won't last forever, though Chester overhears Barry talking to Iris on the phone and discovers that Barry thinks they could be pregnant. They briefly talk about the versions of the future. Chester then reveals he has a plan to use the unpredictable against the Godspeeds. Chester wants to overload them with the modern speak, creating confusion so that the team can take them down one by one. Frost enlists Mark's help and gives him back his Chilbane weapons and tells him that if he breaks her trust, he'll never get it back. Cecile uses her powers to help Ultraviolet remain calm while in surgery. The Godspeeds find a way to get through the force field. The Godspeeds get into Star Labs. Chester runs to the time vault for safety on Barry's orders. Gideon suggests they adapt Chester's plan to pipe the modem speak all through the facility, since the plan to do it all over Central City won't work. Almost immediately, the Godspeeds are confused, giving Frost, Flash, and Chilbane a chance to truly fight them. However, one of them bursts into the time vault and takes out Gideon, ending the advantage. The Flash manages to lure them all away before they can kill the team. I was quite impressed with Chester because For the most part, since we've been introduced to Chester, he's been a bit silly, and they've been trying to make him as Cisco 2.0, but I really thought he came into his own as a character in this episode. He wasn't trying to be Cisco, he was just himself, and he was a lot more serious. So, I really enjoyed the screen time and the role that Chester played, and he really came through for this one, so good job on the show's part. We then see the Flash is surrounded by Godspeeds and he is attacked, but then another group of Godspeeds show up and they start fighting each other, leaving Barry very confused. The Godspeeds then disappear altogether. Ultraviolet survives her surgery and should be back to normal. The Godspeeds barely stole any of his speed, but Barry thinks that the Godspeeds that came to save him were less worried about saving him and more about wanting to kill the other 6. It turns out we may have a Godspeed civil war on their hands. Frost decides to give Mark a chance, and after a moment they move to kiss, but there's a small explosion and Mark vanishes. He's left Caitlin all by herself. I wonder. Back at the crime lab, Barry goes to run those tests he had planned to use earlier, but it turns out that Iris isn't pregnant, and the test results have come back negative. He now questions the future. We then see outside of Central City, Joe and Kramer stake out where they expect to find Adam, and Kramer is a bit nervous about confronting him. She's trying to understand what could be enough to change him into someone who would stab her in the back. While they are talking, Joe notices something and Kramer panics, telling him to get out of the car, and then we see the car explode. And that ends episode 15 on an epic cliffhanger, and that wraps up my review. As I mentioned already, excellent episode, loved every second of it. Lots of great action, lots of great storytelling. The highlights for me was definitely seeing an army of Godspeeds beating up the Flash and Flash trying to fight them all off at once. Loved every second of this, and for me this was definitely one of the best episodes of season 7, and I'm really looking forward to the next episode as we're building up to not only the season finale of the show, but we're also building up to the 150th episode as well. So nothing bad for me to say about this. Loved every minute of it, and a top-notch episode. And I'm so glad that this episode turned the show around, and I'm hoping they're going to keep this momentum going. So with that all said, I'm going to wrap this up now. What did you think of episode 15? Did you enjoy it? What was your thoughts on the army of Godspeeds? Did you enjoy the scene where they were putting the beating down to Barry? And also, why do you think there is a civil war between an army of Godspeeds? Do you think we'll learn the truth about that eventually? And also, do you think there is still a possibility that Iris West could end up pregnant? And also, what was your thoughts of the ending? Do you think Joe and Kramer survived the explosion of the car, or do you think they didn't? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Flash Season 7 review series, where I am going to be talking about episode 16, which I am very much looking forward to talking about, especially with the way this episode ended, and it should be a lot of fun, so can't wait for that. So until next time, take care everybody, and stay safe, and once again, thanks for listening.